Sultan Selim's only son Suleiman came to Istanbul from Manisa upon the death of his father and ascended the throne on September 30, 1520. A few days after his accession to the throne, letters were written to the governor of Egypt Janbirdi, the sheriff of Mecca, and the Khan of Crimea to inform them of his accession. The letters emphasized obedience and justice by pointing out that the rich, poor, urban and peasant people should obey him, and that those who failed in their duties, whether they were rich or poor, should not be differentiated between each other. The son of Selim I, who became known to history as Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, set examples that he would pursue a policy of justice as soon as he became Sultan. In a short time, news of Sultan Suleiman's just actions spread to every corner of the country. Thus, he was nicknamed Kanuni among the people. During his accession to the throne, the governor of Damascus Janbirdi Ghazali, who wanted to take advantage of the new sultan's youth and inexperience, started a rebellion with the aim of establishing his own state in the region. In addition to the governorate of Damascus, he had control over a significant part of Syria, including the lands of Beirut and Tripoli. Janbirdi Ghazali was a Slav captured by Akinjis in Rumelia during the reign of Bayezid II and was among the 20 captives presented to the Sultan of Egypt. He was freed by the Mamluk Sultan Melik Ashraf and became one of the most influential emirs during the reigns of Sultan Kansugardi and Tomambay. Janbirdi Ghazali, who fought against the Turks as one of the most trusted emirs of the Mamluk Sultan in the battles of Merjidabek and Ridania, swore allegiance to Sultan Selim after the conquest of Egypt and was appointed governor of Damascus by Sultan Selim. Such was the history of Janbirdi Ghazali, who rebelled against the Magnificent. When he raised the flag of rebellion against the Ottoman Empire, he took the title of Melik Ashraf and declared his own sovereignty. On the one hand, he endeavored to gather forces rapidly, and on the other hand, he wrote letters to the Safavid ruler Shah Ismail and the Egyptian governor Janbirdi, fearing that he would fail if he was left alone. In his letter to Janbirdi, he invited him to join forces with him. Janbirdi, on the other hand, wrote a very cunning reply, pointing out that he had to capture all of Syria in order to be successful, especially Aleppo, which was one of the most important locations. On the other hand, he sent Janbirdi Ghazali's letter to Suleiman the Magnificent. Janbirdi Ghazali marched on Aleppo with a force of 15,000 cavalry and 800 riflemen. The Beylerbey of Aleppo, Karaca Pasha, took the base of Hama and Homs with him and put a fierce resistance, while the reprisal forces dispatched by Suleiman the Magnificent were on their way with great speed despite the winter season. Meanwhile, the governor of Egypt, Janbirdi, consulted the Sultan about whether he should send troops against Janbirdi. The Sultan gave a very accurate answer that there was no need for this and that the reprisal forces would be sent from Anatolia. In the meantime, while Janbirdi Ghazali was besieging Aleppo, the third Vizier Ferhat Pasha, who had been appointed as the commander of the reprisal forces, mobilized with 4,000 janissaries, and an equal number of forces from the 5 Sipahis of the provinces of Karaman and Sivas were united under his command. In addition, the Dulkadir Bey Sheikh Suvaroğlu Ali Bey was also assigned to help Ferhat Pasha. Not waiting for Ferhat Pasha to arrive, Sheikh Suvaroğlu Ali Bey arrived at the battlefield earlier due to his proximity to Aleppo. With the Dulkadirli forces under his command, he attacked Janbirdi Ghazali and forced him to lift the siege of Aleppo and retreat to Damascus. While Janbirdi Ghazali was retreating towards Damascus, Ferhat Pasha, the commander of the repulsed forces, had reached Aleppo. Thus, the troops of Sheikh Suvaroğlu Ali Bey and Karaca Ahmed Pasha, who were gathered under the command of the 3rd Vizier Ferhat Pasha, advanced on the forces of Janbirdi Ghazali. Janbirdi Ghazali went out of the city to meet the reprisal forces coming against him. The two armies came face to face on the outskirts of Damascus. In the battle that took place here, Janbirdi Ghazali suffered a terrible defeat. Captured by the Ottoman soldiers, Janbirdi Ghazali was beheaded and his head was sent to the Sultan. Thus, this rebellion, which went down in history as the Janbirdi Ghazali rebellion, was suppressed in a short time. Upon this, Suleiman the Magnificent appointed Anatolian Beylerbey Ayas Pasha to the governorship of Damascus. He also assigned Ferhat Pasha to wait around Kayseri, because Shah Ismail had gathered troops on the frontier to act according to the course of the Janbirdi Ghazali rebellion. Ferhat Pasha, who was observing the Iranian side from the vicinity of Kayseri, was to wait there with his army until he was sure of the situation. In the meantime, ambassadors were sent to countries to announce the accession of Suleiman the Magnificent. The Turkish envoy sent to the Hungarian king Behram Çavuş, one of the surgeons of the Imperial Council, was killed by the Hungarian king. The Hungarians were provoking the Ottoman Empire for the second time. During the reign of Sultan Selim, the Ottoman Empire had not yet accelerated the pace of conquest in Europe due to its preoccupation with the eastern campaigns. On the contrary, this pace had reached its highest point. In the face of the great power of the Turks, the task of the Hungarians was to avoid actions that would lead to war as much as possible. However, the Hungarians themselves chose war instead of peace. The new Sultan could not remain silent against this second provocation of the Hungarians. The Ottoman Empire declared war against Hungary. When the campaign against the Hungarians was decided, the gathering of forces started immediately. Ahmet Pasha, the Beylerbey of Rumelia, set off from Istanbul and went to Uppsala. Ferhat Pasha in Kayseri was ordered to move to Rumelia. An Ottoman fleet of 50 ships under the command of Danishmend Reis was dispatched from the Black Sea to the Danube. In addition, the Sanjak based in the Danube and Sava regions were ordered to prepare 400 horseboats. Thus, everything was done in perfect order for the Sultan's expedition. Suleiman the Magnificent, who embarked on a campaign against the Hungarians, set out from Istanbul after first visiting the tombs of his father and then his ancestors. On May the 27th, 1521, he arrived in Edirne. Madrasa students in Edirne voluntarily joined the Sultan's army. The students of Plovdiv and Sofia madrasas would also join the army voluntarily. Upon arriving in Plovdiv, a council was established and the plan of action was discussed. The Sultan was influenced by two ideas discussed in the council. The first of these ideas was to capture only the city of Belgrade and its vicinity with this operation, and the second was to enter Hungary directly and capture the Hungarian capital and all of its lands. The idea of capturing Belgrade was defended by the Grand Vizier Piri Mehmet Pasha, and the other idea was defended by his rival Ahmet Pasha, the Beylerbey of Rumelia. The Grand Vizier pointed out that Belgrade was the gateway to Hungary and that it would be dangerous to march to Hungary without conquering it. For this reason, he wanted to urge the Sultan towards a planned conquest. Ahmet Pasha, whose name would later be known as the traitor on the other hand, took advantage of the Sultan's inexperience and tried to encourage the Magnificent to a more brilliant campaign, such as the conquest of Hungary. In the end, the Sultan accepted Piri Mehmet Pasha's idea and decided to lay siege to Belgrade. Belgrade, which was located in a very important position as the gateway to Hungary, was originally a Serbian city, but it had been left to the Hungarians by the Serbian despot Branković, who realized that he could not defend it against the Turks. Until the time of the Magnificent, Belgrade was besieged twice by the Turks. The first siege was in 1441 during the reign of Murad II, and the second in 1456 during the reign of Muhammad the Conqueror. Although great efforts were made in both sieges, the conquest was not realized. However, in the intervening 65 years, the Ottoman Empire had grown stronger and had long since recovered from its previous failures. This campaign was a special one, as it was the first campaign in which Suleiman the Magnificent participated. European states would see the power of the new Ottoman Sultan for the first time. While the Ottoman army under the command of Suleiman the Magnificent was marching towards Belgrade through Edirne, Plovdiv, Sofia and Niš with great order, the Sultan sent forces ahead of him under the command of some commanders. Bosnian Bey Yahya Paşazade was assigned to raid Croatia and Mihalolu Mehmet Bey was assigned to raid Transylvania. Before reaching Niš, Husrev Bey the Bey of Semendre was assigned to blockade the city of Belgrade. While the Sultan marched to the Sabac castle with his main army, the Grand Vizier Piri Mehmet Pasha marched to Belgrade with his Sipahis, Azabs and 1,000 janissaries under his command. The castle of Sabac had changed hands between the Turks and Hungarians several times before. Its walls were strong and its fortifications sturdy. But despite the fierce resistance of the defenders, the castle could not withstand the Turkish army's formidable onslaught. On July 7, 1521, Sabac was captured by the Turks. This was the first castle conquered by Suleiman the Magnificent. The city was immediately fortified and reconstructed. In the meantime, news were received that the Grand Vizier Piri Mehmet Pasha had also conquered the castle of Zemlin. The fortress of Zemlin, located opposite Belgrade, had fallen with Husrev Bey's artillery bombardments. Meanwhile, Suleiman the Magnificent arrived in front of Belgrade with his army on August 1, 1521. With the arrival of the Sultan, the blockade of Belgrade was turned into a siege. Grand Vizier Piri Mehmet Pasha commanded the Sava River front south of the city, while Ahmet Pasha, the Beylerbey of Rumelia, commanded the Danube side. Some of Ahmet Pasha's troops also landed on the island of Vojno Ostorovo to the north of the city. The siege began with fierce cannon fire from all sides. Thanks to the rifled cannons, a marvelous discovery of Ottoman engineering, huge breaches were made in the strong walls of Belgrade. With the order given, the Turkish soldiers quickly advanced to the walls. A lot of breaches had been made in the walls. The castle defenders, consisting of Hungarian, Serbian and Bulgarian soldiers, did not know which breaches to hold. In a short time, the Turkish army broke through the walls and entered the city of Belgrade. Unable to resist for long, the castle defenders retreated to the inner castle. The bombardment continued unceasingly until the citadel was captured. Finally, when the enemy's resistance was broken, they handed over the keys of Belgrade's inner fortress to the Ottomans. Thus, the city of Belgrade, which could not be captured for 80 years, was conquered by Suleiman the Magnificent in a very short time. Since the day Suleiman the Magnificent entered the city coincided with Friday, Belgrade's largest church was immediately converted into a mosque. The Sultan and the army performed the Friday prayer here. Those of the Christian inhabitants of Belgrade who wanted to go to Hungary were allowed to do so. Those who accepted jizya were left in their places. Some of the rest of the people migrated to Istanbul. In Feridun Bey's Belgrade Ruzname, he records that those who migrated to Istanbul were Serbs. These Serbs founded the village of Belgrade on the Büyükdere in today's Bosporus. The Belgrade forest near the village also got its name on this occasion. Before leaving Belgrade, Suleiman the Magnificent allocated 20,000 gold coins from the treasury for the repair of the castle and fortifications of the city, and ordered the construction of buildings such as mosques, masjids and almshouses. Yahya Paşazade Bali Bey, the Sanjak Bey of Bosnia, was appointed as the guard of Belgrade along with Semendre with 900,000 silver. Due to the importance of Belgrade, 3,000 janissaries were allocated to Bali Bey's command. In addition, Belgrade fortifications were fortified with 200 cannons. Thus, the conquest of Belgrade opened the door to Hungary for the Ottomans. Thereafter, the city of Belgrade began to be used as a base for the campaigns against Hungary and Austria. In this respect, Belgrade was referred to as Dar al-Jihad in the old Ottoman sources. Sultan Suleiman's conquest of a great city like Belgrade, less than a year after his accession to the throne, was a sign that his reign would be crowned with victories. In this respect, the attention of the European states was focused on the new Ottoman Sultan. Shortly afterwards, Russia and Venice sent envoys to congratulate the Sultan. The Russian envoy wanted an alliance between the Ottomans and Russia. However, Sultan Suleiman rejected this proposal of the Russians and did not favor such an agreement. The Venetian envoy, on the other hand, offered to pay the Ottomans a tribute of 10,000 ducats per year for the island of Cyprus and 500 ducats per year for the island of Zanta in exchange for a 30-year non-aggression and trade agreement between the Ottomans and Venice. This offer was approved and accepted by Sultan Suleiman. The strategic value of Rhodes, the largest of the islands of the southwestern coast of Anatolia, was known to the Ottoman sultans. One of those who appreciated this very well was Muhammad the Conqueror. The Paladins, the owner of this island, were engaged in piracy, harming merchant ships in the eastern Mediterranean, and were also enemies of the Turks by entering into alliances against the Ottomans. Muhammad the Conqueror tried to conquer Rhodes in order to put an end to this harmful situation of the Knights and to establish Turkish sovereignty in this part of the Mediterranean, but he was not successful. During the siege of Rhodes, during the reign of Sultan Muhammad the Conqueror, the Knights survived great dangers and observed the Turkish might in person, but they still did not hesitate to engage in anti-Ottoman activities. When Bayezid II's brother Shahzadeh Cem took refuge with the Knights of Rhodes, Sultan Bayezid was forced to get on good terms with the Knights. Sultan Selim, on the other hand, was busy with his eastern campaigns, so that the Knights of Rhodes did not worry much about the Ottomans. However, after the conquest of Egypt, Sultan Selim's efforts to strengthen the navy made the Knights of Rhodes suspicious. It was clear that the Ottomans would strike the first blow against the Knights of Rhodes, with their strengthening at sea as well as on land, and eliminate this nest of pirates. Knowing this fact, the Knights of Rhodes increased their defensive measures on the one hand, and tried to harm the Ottomans by taking advantage of opportunities on the other. As a matter of fact, they had helped the Mamluks during the Battle of Ridaniye. During the rebellion of Janbirdi Ghazali, they allied with him and provided him with weapons, ammunition and cannons. Suleiman the Magnificent, who had returned from the Belgrade campaign with a brilliant success, was aiming to put an end to the activities of this pirate nest forever when he decided to launch an expedition to Rhodes. The political situation in the world was very favorable for the Rhodes expedition. Western states were not in a position to come to the rescue of Rhodes or threaten the Turks from land. The Hungarians had suffered a great blow with the loss of Belgrade. King Louis II was not a resourceful person either. The German Emperor Charles, who had the most power to threaten the Ottomans on land and sea, was at war with King Francis of France. Pope Leon IX, who could rally Christians and form a crusader army like before, was dealing with the Protestant sect started by Martin Luther. The Venetians, who could pose the most important threat to the Ottomans at sea, had just signed a treaty. Therefore, it was the right time to conquer the island of Rhodes. However, there were still differences of opinion in the court as to whether the island could be conquered or not. The experience of the siege of Rhodes during the reign of Muhammad the Conqueror had shown that the fortifications of Rhodes were very strong. Moreover, the Rhodians had further increased their fortifications since the time of Muhammad the Conqueror and had turned Rhodes into an impregnable fortress. it was possible for Rhodes to withstand a long siege with such a strong fortification. This was the point that caused some state officials to hesitate. Some of them thought that it was possible for Europeans to come to the aid of the Paladins during the long siege of Rhodes. On the other hand, Grand Vizier Piri Mehmed Pasha, Second Vizier Çoban Mustafa Pasha and Muslihiddin Reis, analyzing the political situation in the world, were of the opinion that the European states could not unite at that time and come to the rescue of Rhodes. Thereupon, Suleiman the Magnificent decided to launch an expedition against Rhodes. Before starting preparations for the campaign, spies were sent to gather detailed information about the island of Rhodes. Since the Ottoman spy organization worked very well, a great deal of information was gathered about the political atmosphere and defense arrangements on the island. In fact, some people who had positions in Rhodes were obtained by bribery. Chief among them were a Jewish doctor in the castle and Andre, the chief counselor of the Order of Paladins. The Ottoman fleet set sail from Istanbul at the beginning of the second week of June. While the fleet was moving by sea, Sultan Suleiman, accompanied by his captains and Anatolian soldiers, started to move by land from Istanbul on June the 16th. The Knights of Rhodes, who were aware of the situation, strengthened their defenses to defend the island on the one hand and asked for help from the Pope and the King of France on the other. At the same time, they piled up a year's supply of provisions and ammunition on the island to be ready for any eventuality. While the Sultan's army was advancing to Marmaris via Kütahya, Sandıklı, Aydın and Çine, the Ottoman navy had reached the northwest of Rhodes. The commander of the navy, Mustafa Pasha, had landed troops on the island and prepared the siege and had duly written a letter to the Knights of Rhodes to surrender the island. However, the Grand Master of the Knights rejected the surrender offer, relying on the strength of the fortifications and the help from Europe. In the meantime, the Sultan and his army had reached Marmaris from where they boarded ships and proceeded to Rhodes. Mustafa Pasha, who had prepared the siege organization, was waiting for the Sultan in Rhodes. When Suleiman the Magnificent landed on the island, he found the preparations for the siege perfect. From the first moment of landing on the island, trenches were dug and cannons were placed where necessary. The number of cannons was over 100. Two of these cannons were the big Shahi cannons used by Muhammad the Conqueror in the siege of Constantinople. As for the situation of Rhodes at this time, the castle of Rhodes, which had the title of the most fortified castle in the world at the time, indeed had strong fortifications worthy of this title. Christians were convinced that Rhodes could not be captured. For this reason, the saying, "Only the Rhodians open the gates of Rhodes," had spread in Europe. The Knights of Rhodes, who knew how to learn from history, had learned many lessons from Muhammad the Conqueror's sieges of Istanbul and Rhodes. For this reason, the Venetian engineer Gabriel Martinengo, the most famous artillery and engineering expert of that period, was brought to Rhodes for a high fee. Engineer Martinengo, who had previously played an important role in the siege of Crete, built an inner fortification, constructed underground roads between the positions, and accurately adjusted the placement of the castle cannons. In addition, a large chain was stretched across the mouth of the harbor, as the Eastern Romans had done in Istanbul. The Rhodes castle was defended by 15,000 soldiers, excluding civilians. In the Turkish army, a force of approximately 100,000 men was divided into 5 groups. The first group was led by Ayas Pasha against the German and French bastions on the northern front. The second group was led by the third Vizier Ahmed Pasha against the Spanish in front of Porto d'Ambuez. The third group led by the second Vizier Mustafa Pasha against the English bastion. The fourth group under the command of the Beylerbey of Anatolia Qasim Pasha against the province bastion in the south. And the fifth group under the command of the Grand Vizier Piri Mehmed Pasha against the Italians in front of Kızılkapı in the southeast. On July the 29th, Suleiman the Magnificent ordered the bombardment to begin after a thorough review of the front of the battle. Turkish cannons began to pound the strongest fortress of Christianity. The city was bombarded continuously for 3 days, and then, starting from August the 1st, the activity of digging sewers and filling trenches began. While the Turks were digging sewers, the Paladins were also digging counter-sewers to neutralize them, as in the siege of Constantinople. Gabriel Martinengo was of the greatest service to the Paladins in this regard. The month of August was filled with bombardment and sewage digging activities. During this time, the fortifications suffered considerable damage and destruction. However, the breaches and ruins were immediately repaired by the Knights of Rhodes, and in addition to the soldiers, the people of Rhodes also took part in the repair work. Finally, on the 4th day of September, the first attack was made by Mustafa Pasha against the English bastion. The Turkish forces marched through the breaches and captured 7 enemy flags in a short time. However, the Rhodes reserve forces immediately came to the rescue of the English bastion. As a result of the battles fought here, the Turkish soldiers had to retreat with 2,000 martyrs. Six days later, when the attack on the same area was repeated, both sides suffered many casualties. On September the 13th, in the third attack, 5 Turkish flags were placed on the bastions. But again, the castle could not be entered. On the morning of September the 24th, the Sultan ordered a simultaneous attack from all fronts. During this attack, the Janissary Aga placed the Turkish flag on the Spanish bastion. However, in a short time, the bastion fell back into the hands of the Rhodians. Due to the fierce resistance of the castle defenders and the fact that they fought really well, the Turkish forces had to retreat. Three days after this general offensive, which ended in failure, the news of the death of Egyptian governor Hayrbay came. Thereupon, Suleiman the Magnificent appointed Mustafa Pasha, the second Vizier, as the governor of Egypt and handed over his duties as the commander of Rhodes and second Vizier to Ahmed Pasha, the third Vizier. Until the end of October, 3 more attacks were made on various bastions, but again, no definite result was obtained. Finally, on October the 30th, the Italian and Spanish bastions were captured by the Turks, albeit for a short time. Now, the moats were filling up, the ruins on the walls were increasing, the strength of the bastions was decreasing, and the fall of the Paladins in Rhodes was gradually approaching. In the meantime, the Turkish spy network on the island was regularly informing the Ottoman army about the status of supplies, artillery and ammunition, while propaganda was being spread in the city to mobilize the civilian population against the Paladins. As a result of this propaganda, the Orthodox Greeks in the city began to revolt against the Knights and demanded that the city be ceded to the Ottomans. The revolting Greeks were bluntly suppressed by the Knights. Thus, the Turks were well aware that the defense of Rhodes was about to collapse. Suleiman the Magnificent, wishing to grant his adversary a last honorable chance of salvation, while at the same time preventing the destruction of Rhodes and reducing the casualties of the Turkish forces, made an offer to the Knights on December the 10th. In this proposal, the Sultan demanded the surrender of Rhodes within 3 days, and stated that if this condition was accepted, he would treat the Knights with an honorable surrender. But there was no response to this offer. Thereupon, Suleiman the Magnificent ordered his army to launch a general offensive for the last time on December the 18th. The assault on the Spanish and Italian bastions was so fierce that the knights in these areas were forced to retreat behind the fortifications and moats inside the city. In this way, the Turkish army managed to enter the city of Rhodes. Rhodes was now conquered. Finally, realizing that they could not resist any longer, the Knights of Rhodes agreed to surrender. According to the surrender agreement, all the knights would leave the island of Rhodes with their belongings and weapons within 12 days. Those who leave Rhodes will be transported to the island of Crete by Turkish ships. Civilians who wish to stay in the city will be allowed to practice their religion. The people of Rhodes would be exempt from taxes for 5 years. Thus, the state of the Knights of Jan in Rhodes was destroyed and the island of Rhodes was conquered by the Turks. The number of Turkish soldiers martyred during this siege of Rhodes, which lasted for about 5 months, reached around 40,000. With the conquest of Rhodes, the biggest obstacle and boilhead between Istanbul, Egypt and Haramain was eliminated. Immediate administrative and military organization, repair of castles, construction of madrasas, schools and almshouses for the poor were ordered. Muslims from Anatolia were transferred to the island and Rhodes was turned into an Islamic city. The conquest of Rhodes by the Turks was announced to the whole world. While this situation caused great fear in the Christian world, the struggle between East and West entered a new phase. The Conquest of Rhodes by Suleiman the Magnificent, which was considered as an impossible conquest, increased his prestige all over the world. Even the Safavid ruler Shah Ismail sent envoys to the Sultan to congratulate him on this victory. Ahmed Pasha, who had risen to the rank of second vizier and whose name would later be known as a traitor, had the ambition of replacing Piri Mehmed Pasha, the grand vizier. For this purpose, he spoke against Piri Mehmed Pasha at every opportunity in order to discredit and replace him. Piri Mehmed Pasha, whom Sultan Selim I had appointed as the Grand Vizier, was, as Pechevi says, a highly intelligent and wise vizier. Even Sultan Suleiman was ashamed of him and shunned him, and even said of him, "Whenever he would enter my presence, I would see myself discouraged in everything and hesitant in making decisions." Suleiman the Magnificent's intention was to appoint Pargalı Ibrahim, who was his Hasodabaşı, to the position of Grand Vizier. Pargalı Ibrahim, who was of Greek origin, had been initiated to Suleiman when he was still a prince in Manisa. Thanks to his intelligence and his playful nature, Ibrahim, who had entered the prince's personal service, had gained not only the confidence but also the personal friendship of the Magnificent. For this reason, when Sultan Suleiman ascended the throne, he brought Ibrahim to Istanbul and promoted him to the rank of Hasodabaşı. Pargalı Ibrahim was one of the rare people raised by the Ottoman education system, highly intelligent, cultured, elegant, fluent in Greek, Italian, Turkish, Arabic and Persian. He loved to read the works of history and geography, especially the battles of Hannibal and Alexander the Great. Finally, Suleiman the Magnificent decided to retire Piri Mehmed Pasha, the 58-year-old Grand Vizier with an allocation of 200,000 akçe, and to appoint Pargalı Ibrahim, the Hasodabaşı, to the position of Grand Vizier. Since he was a novice in governmental affairs, the historian Celalzade Mustafa Çelebi, one of Piri Mehmed Pasha's assistants, was placed under his command. Although the rank of Hasodabaşı was considered equal to the rank of Vizier, the appointment from Hasodabaşı to the position of the Grand Vizier was considered contrary to the rules. As a matter of procedure, one of the other viziers, especially the second vizier, had to be appointed to the position of the Grand Vizier. This vizier was Ahmed Pasha, who would later be known as the traitor. With his slanders, he had helped to remove the Grand Vizier Piri Mehmed Pasha from his post, but he could not reach his position. It was not easy to remove Pargalı Ibrahim, a close friend of the Sultan, from his position. Nevertheless, Ahmed Pasha's ambition to rise was unending. If he could not become the Grand Vizier, then he should become the Sultan. Second Vizier Ahmed Pasha appeared before Suleiman the Magnificent and demanded that he be dismissed from the position of Second Vizier and that he be given the governorship of Egypt instead. According to the history of Solakzadeh, the whole palace knew that Ahmed Pasha was a very seditious person. Since the entire court was incapacitated by his hands and tongue, everyone agreed to give him the governorship of Egypt. Thus, Ahmed Pasha became the new governor of Egypt. Suleiman the Magnificent had made the right decision by not making Ahmed Pasha the Grand Vizier, but he could not show the same accuracy a second time. It was undoubtedly a great mistake to send Ahmed Pasha, whose ambitions had already been exposed, away from Istanbul, especially to a place like Egypt as governor. The year in which the Mamluks collapsed and Egypt fell to the Ottomans was a successful but difficult year for Sultan Selim. It was the first time the Ottoman Empire had conquered a country with so much potential for trouble. After the Ottoman troops withdrew, a rebellion against the Ottomans in the region was very likely. Considering the conditions and culture of the region, Sultan Selim thought that it wouldn't be right to appoint a governor from a different culture. Therefore, he appointed Hayrabai, one of the Mamluk emirs whom he trusted, as governor here. Hayrabai was the left-wing commander of the Mamluk army at the Battle of Mohacs. After the conquest of Damascus, he asked for forgiveness from Sultan Selim and declared his loyalty to him. During his 6-year governorship here, Hayrabai had governed Egypt by taking the procedures and laws of the Mamluk era into consideration. Therefore, the people in Egypt did not find the new situation strange. Although he had more favorable opportunities, he did not attempt to revolt like Janbirdi Ghazali and remained loyal to the Ottomans until his death. When Suleiman the Magnificent received the news of Hayrabai's death during the ongoing siege of Rhodes, he sent his brother-in-law Mustafa Pasha, the second vizier, to this task. Mustafa Pasha arrived in Cairo as the governor of Egypt, and soon after his inauguration, he faced the uprisings of the Circassian Mamluks. Aiming to re-establish the Mamluk state, the Circassians planned to storm the court and kill Mustafa Pasha. The rebellion was led by the Sanjak Beys of Shakir, Garbia and Edfihir. These Mamluk Sanjak Beys gathered a force of 20,000 people around them. In addition, in order to increase their supporters, they wrote letters all over Egypt, declaring that the taxes collected were unfair, that if they joined them, they would not be taxed for a year, and then the taxes would be reduced by half. Since it was in the interest of the people, the number of people gathered around the rebels became quite large. They even proclaimed Inal as the new Mamluk Sultan. The governor of Egypt, Choban Mustafa Pasha, did not find it right to fight the rebels suddenly with the insufficient forces he had in the face of the large number of rebels. For this reason, he first tried to break the rift between the Circassian Beys and to attract important personalities to his side. In addition, in order to separate the people from the rebels, he reduced the taxes that were heavy on the people. After the reduction of taxes, many people left the rebels. When the strength of the rebels diminished, Mustafa Pasha decided that it was time to take action and sent a force of 3,000 or 4,000 men, consisting of janissaries and volunteers against Inal, who first proclaimed his sultanate. Inal was defeated and beheaded in the battle at Ridania. After him, the others were easily crushed. Mustafa Pasha hung the heads of 2 of the leaders of the rebels on the battlements of Bab el-Zubayla in Cairo and exposed them to the public. Thus, the Mamluk rebellion was suppressed. Shortly afterwards, Ahmed Pasha, who was dismissed from his position as second vizier, was appointed governor of Egypt. Originally a Georgian, Ahmed Pasha had completed his education in Enderun. He later served as the Janissary Aga. Ahmed, who had attracted Sultan Selim's special attention by taking Selim's side during the struggle for the throne of Prince Selim, had risen to the level of Imrahar and then Beylerbey. With his achievements, he also caught the favor of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and rose to the position of second vizier. As his position increased, so did his ambition and insatiability. This man, who could not restrain his ambition, attempted to become a sultan when he came to Egypt, higher than the position of Grand Vizier, which he had lost to Pargalı Ibrahim Pasha. In order to succeed in the great work he had in mind, he had to win over the leaders of Egypt and the janissaries in the castle of Cairo. The first point was more important. For this reason, he occupied the important positions in Cairo and other parts of Egypt after he obtained the Mamluk base in a short time. The janissaries in the Cairo fortress remained loyal to the Sultan and did not obey his wishes. However, they had to cower in the face of the Mamluks and Arabs. Thus, the traitor Ahmed Pasha, who took the revolting Cairo and Egyptian people behind him, besieged the janissaries in the Cairo castle. And here, he declared that he re-established the Mamluk state and declared his sovereignty with the title of Al-Malik al-Mansur. With this act, the traitor Ahmed Pasha was not only committing an act of treason, but also attempting to tear away a whole country that had been conquered with much bloodshed from the Ottoman Empire. As soon as he started to introduce himself as Sultan, he revived the old Mamluk organization. He sent a message to the Pope and asked for support. When Ahmed Pasha's rebellion became known in Istanbul, Suleiman the Magnificent was furious. He allocated 3,000 janissaries to the third Vizier Ayaz Pasha and assigned him to suppress the rebellion. Ahmed Pasha was running out of time. He could not capture the janissaries in Cairo and could not control the Cairo castle. No matter how much wealth and position Ahmed Pasha offered to the janissaries, he could not make them break their oath and join his side. The Pasha resorted to all kinds of maneuvers to get rid of the janissaries, but he could not succeed. The janissaries killed 4,000 Arabs who attacked the castle and showed their loyalty to the Sultan. However, the traitor Ahmed Pasha learned from one of the Mamluk beys that there was a sewer that had not been used for 200 years. This sewer allowed secret entry to the palace. When Ahmed Pasha learned about this situation, he and his soldiers managed to reach the Cairo castle by passing through the sewer in the middle of the night. Thus, the janissaries were unexpectedly attacked. Some janissaries were murdered in this raid. The other janissaries somehow managed to escape from the castle and hide. Thus, Ahmed Pasha, who had captured the castle of Cairo, felt more secure. After this, Ahmed Pasha attempted to establish the government organization and imitated the Ottoman state organization in administrative affairs. He even appointed 3 viziers for himself. Among Ahmed Pasha's viziers was a man named Ghazali Mehmed. Although Mehmed Bey was vizier to Ahmed Pasha, he was secretly loyal to Sultan Suleiman. It was this man who would be the one to deal with Ahmed Pasha, who raised the flag of rebellion against the Ottomans and declared his sultanate in Egypt. Ghazali Mehmed Bey secretly gathered the janissaries hiding in Cairo and hid them. One day, when Ahmed Pasha left the castle and went to the bathhouse, Mehmed Bey caught him by surprise and stormed the bathhouse with janissaries loyal to Sultan Suleiman. The janissaries shouted, "Allahu Yansur as Sultan Suleiman." That is to say, they slaughtered Ahmed Pasha's men in the bathhouse with chants of, "May Allah make Sultan Suleiman victorious." When Ahmed Pasha realized that he was being attacked, he left his shave unfinished, jumped from the roof of the bathhouse and managed to escape and enter the Cairo castle. He ordered the gates of the castle to be closed and to be on the alert for support from the Mamluks. Although the soldiers of his entourage were put to the sword during the sudden attack, he retreated to the castle, which made his capture more difficult. Seeing that the situation was becoming increasingly difficult and that the Mamluks would come to Ahmed Pasha's aid, Ghazali Mehmed Bey was worried. It was impossible to capture the castle before the Mamluks arrived. Therefore, Mehmed Bey found the solution by revolting the people of Cairo. Together with the Janissaries, he announced to the people that the treasures of Cairo were in the castle, and if they helped capture the traitors in the castle, they could take all the gold in the castle. Thus, the Arabs in Cairo were provoked to plunder. The Arabs, eager to seize the gold, climbed the castle walls and reached the castle. The traitor Ahmed Pasha was beheaded and hung on the Zuwayla gate. He was exposed to the public, saying that this would be the end of those who rebelled against the Ottomans. In this way, the traitor Ahmed Pasha, who had caused trouble for the state, received the punishment he deserved. Meanwhile, a force of 3,000 Janissaries under the command of the 3rd Vizier Ayaz Pasha, who had come overland to suppress the Egyptian rebellion, turned back. Güzelce Qasim Pasha was appointed the new governor of Egypt by the Magnificent. Kadızade Mehmed Bey and the Janissaries, who succeeded in suppressing the rebellion of the traitor Ahmed Pasha, were rewarded by Sultan Suleiman. In addition, Kadızade Mehmed Bey was granted the office of the treasurer of Egypt, as a reward for his service, and his fiefs were added. Thus, the rebellions in Egypt were suppressed, and it was decided that the administration in Egypt would be organized in a fair manner, in accordance with the culture of the region as it had been during the reign of Sultan Selim. The Grand Vizier Pargalı Ibrahim Pasha, who was sent to Egypt for this purpose, stayed in Egypt for 3 months and listened to the troubles and problems of the people. Taking these into consideration, and in consultation with the Mamluk emirs, he drafted a fair code of law. Taxes that were heavy on the people were reduced. The Ottoman order, which was not suitable for the structure of Egypt, was expanded, and laws similar to the Mamluk laws were introduced instead. Thus, the people were content with Ibrahim Pasha's justice, and the Egyptian people's respect and love for the Ottomans increased. As long as Suleiman the Magnificent lived, Egyptians never rebelled again and remained loyal to the Ottomans. A few months before the suppression of the rebellion started by the traitor Ahmed Pasha in Egypt, the Safavid Shah Ismail had died and his son Tahmasp succeeded him. However, his accession had not been notified to Istanbul via embassy. This behavior indicated that he was going to take a hostile attitude towards the Ottomans. For this reason, Suleiman the Magnificent did not deem it necessary to congratulate him on the succession. He was even angry about it. Since he was informed that the new Shah was engaged in hostile activities against the Ottomans, he dictated a heavy letter to Nishancı Celalzade. In this letter, he expressed that his behavior was not correct, and hinted that he would soon embark on an eastern expedition and capture Tabriz, Azerbaijan, and perhaps Iran and Turan. This insinuation of Suleiman showed that he was planning a Turanian expedition like his father. His aim was to ensure unity by dominating the Turkic countries, to completely dominate the West with the mighty force that would emerge, and to fulfill the ideal of the longed-for state of the world, and to realize the goal of the Prophet. For Iran, the Uzbeks were ready to help, and the Ottomans were already friends with the Uzbeks. However, the danger of the European Union, which was organized around Charles in the West, prevented the realization of this great ideal. The Safavids were sending envoys to Charles and the Hungarian king and were trying to organize joint action against the Ottomans. In the years coinciding with the beginning of the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, Germany and France, two of the largest European states, had become enemies and started to struggle against each other. While the political struggle between these two great states was going on, Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestant sect, emerged, and Western Christianity began to suffer from a religious crisis as well as a political crisis. In 1516, Charles became King of Spain, and in 1519 he was elected German Emperor. Thus, when Charles became a ruler with very large territories, France was surrounded by Charles' lands. The French had suffered many hardships in the years of warfare with the Germans on the frontiers of Germany, Italy and Spain. The French, who were very worn out in all these battles, suffered the biggest defeat against the Germans at the Battle of Pavia in 1525. In this great battle, King Francis of France was captured by the Germans. Charles sent the captured French King Francis to Madrid and imprisoned him. The French, whose ruler was captured, were in a difficult situation. Meanwhile, an activity against Charles also emerged in England. King Henry VIII of England, calculating that the whole of Europe would fall into the hands of the Germans after the defeat of France, signed a neutrality agreement with France by leaving the German alliance. Thereupon, the Papal, Venetian and Florentine governments politically sided with the British. The only state that could break this gigantic German power in Europe and deal with the Germans was the Ottoman Empire. Since the Ottoman Empire was an Islamic state, it was considered blasphemous by Christians at that time for a Christian state to seek help from an Islamic state. However, despite this, it was the Muslim Turks to whom the French opened their hands. King Francis of France and his mother Louise de Savoie found salvation in appealing to the great Turkish Sultan. For this purpose, they wrote a letter and signed it to Suleiman the Magnificent. In 1517, Francis, who had brought an offer to Charles to divide the Ottoman Empire, was now hoping for help from the Ottomans. The ambassador Jean de Frangipane, who brought the letters of Francis and his mother, was asking for help against the Germans from Suleiman the Magnificent on behalf of his sovereign. The help requested from Suleiman the Magnificent was to attack Charles' brother Ferdinand. If Suleiman the Magnificent was to launch an expedition against Ferdinand and his protege Hungary, Charles, who would be in a difficult position in the east against the Turkish power, would reduce his pressure on France in the west, and France would be freed from captivity. The Ottoman Sultan's help to the French would have been possible by marching on the Germans at the head of his armies. Since the Hungarians were in front of the Germans, the Turkish blow would undoubtedly land on the Hungarians. Francis' letter was briefly as follows. This is my request to His Excellency, the Sultan, the ruler of many countries and cities of the world, and the master of all oppressed people. When you attack the King of Hungary, even we, with your help and favor, will take our revenge by escaping from prison and attacking King Charles V of Spain. You are the King of Kings. You are the one who has great honor and glory. If you have the grace to defeat him, you can be sure that I will be a good servant from now on. Suleiman the Magnificent did not remain inactive in the face of this request of the French, because Sultan Suleiman considered the great European empire that Charles wanted to establish as dangerous for the Ottomans. He wanted to see not a united Europe, but a divided Europe. While Europe was shaken by Catholic and Protestant sectarian strife, the Ottoman Sultan's protection of the French would divide Western Christianity into two. The shaking of Christian unity would facilitate the advance of Islamic conquests towards the interior of Europe. Sultan Suleiman not only wanted to take France under his protection, but also to support the Protestantism sect founded by Martin Luther. Protestantism, which was born in Europe as a reaction against the Catholic Church and the papacy, was supported by some German princes and peasants. This emerging sect also attracted the attention of the Ottoman state, and ways to take advantage of it was sought. Suleiman the Magnificent contacted them through his intelligence organization and decided to help them both financially and morally in order to ensure the success of their movement. He even considered Protestantism closer to Islam than Catholicism and considered them as people who had become capable of accepting the Islamic religion. Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, said that the Turks were a divine force sent by God, and even claimed that resisting the Turks would lead one to apostatize. Replying to the letter of the King of France, Suleiman the Magnificent addressed him as follows: Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. With the help of Allah Almighty, and with the blessings of the miracles of the last and greatest of the prophets, Prophet Muhammad Mustafa, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and with the support of the holy souls of the four caliphs Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, may the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala be upon them. I, Sultan of Sultans, King of Kings, the shadow of Allah on earth, who bestows the crown to the monarchs, the supreme ruler of the Mediterranean and Black Sea, the Balkans and Anatolia and Azerbaijan and Damascus and Aleppo and Egypt and Mecca and Medina and Jerusalem and all of their Arab dominions and Yemen and the Sultan and the Supreme King of many nations, which my ancestors conquered, and which I possess with the power of my fiery spear and my victorious sword, Sultan Suleiman Khan, the son of Sultan Selim Khan, the son of Sultan Bayezid Khan. You are Francis, King of the French province. You have sent a letter to my door, the refuge of kings, informing me that your country has been invaded and that you have been captured and imprisoned. You ask for my help to get out of this situation. Keep your heart content and do not be sad. Remember that captivity isn't a strange thing for the rulers. You should know that I, always walking with my sword as my ancestors did, do not hesitate to go on expeditions and make conquests. I am ready to fight at any time. Only Allah will do what He wills. You will learn from your messenger what I will do. Written in the beginning of Rabiul Akhir in the year 1932 in the city of Constantinople, the gate of the Supreme Sultanate. Thus, while the Ottoman Empire was preparing for action against the Germans, a political grouping against the Germans was also visible in Europe. If Suleiman the Magnificent struck a blow against the Hungarians, it would be at the expense of the Germans, because when Hungary was invaded, the Turkish armies themselves would come to the German border. In addition, since the Hungarian King Louis II and Charles V were related, Charles was closely interested in the future of Hungarian lands. Hungarian King Louis II had married Mary, the sister of Charles and Archduke Ferdinand, and Charles' brother Ferdinand had married Louis' sister Anna. Since Louis had no sons, Archduke Ferdinand considered himself the heir to the Hungarian throne. Charles, who was following the Ottoman activities against Germany, contacted the Safavid Shah Tahmasp and agreed to take joint action against the Ottomans. When the Ottomans advanced against the Germans, the Safavid Shah would also take action against the Ottomans from the east. Being aware of this situation, Suleiman the Magnificent established a close friendship with the Uzbeks, and the Uzbeks were ready to attack the Safavids in such a situation. All winter, preparations were made for the conquest of Hungary. Ships were built. New cannons were made. The Turkish artillery in this period had reached the most advanced power in the world and had reached a level not found in any other state. Due to events such as the Hungarians meddling in Walachia's affairs, their alliance with Moldavia against the Ottomans, the danger of Charles establishing a European empire, and on the other hand, making an agreement with the Safavids, it became essential to make a campaign against Hungary. After Suleiman the Magnificent had assured the French ambassadors that he had taken France under his protection and that France would be liberated, the tomb of Aba Ayyub al-Ansari, the tomb of Abul Wafa, the tombs of his father Sultan Selim, his grandfather Bayezid, and his ancestor Sultan Muhammad were visited. After these visits, on April the 23rd, 1526, with an army of 80,000 people and 300 cannons, he set out from Istanbul to Hungary. From the moment of departure from Istanbul, the march of the army took place in great order. Entering cultivated fields or causing any harm to the people was strictly forbidden. Those who attempted such acts were severely punished. The Ottoman army marched to Belgrade via Edirne, Plovdiv, Sofia and Niš. Pargalı Ibrahim Pasha, the Grand Vizier and at the same time the Beylerbeyi of Rumelia, left the Sultan to go ahead as vanguard. The vanguard forces of the Grand Vizier consisted of the Rumelian military, 2,000 Janissary armed guards and some artillery. These forces marched to conquer the city of Petrovaradin, an important position on the Danube. The city withstood the Turkish siege for only 12 days. The Turks easily captured the city by entering through two breaches opened by the explosion of two sewers dug under the walls. In the meantime, the Beylerbeyi of Bosnia had entered the territory of Sirmi and conquered all the fortresses there. After celebrating Eid al-Fitr in Belgrade, the great army under the Sultan's command marched along the Danube. When they arrived in front of the castle of Ulac, it was also subjected to a tremendous siege. At the end of the 7-day siege, Ulac surrendered, and this place was conquered. Suleiman the Magnificent informed the soldiers here that the direction of the army's conquest was Buda, the Hungarian capital. Meanwhile, Hungarians were gathering troops from all over the country for the total defense of their country. The Turks started to capture the castles along the borders one by one, which caused a wave of fear to spread among the Hungarian people. King Louis II asked for support from the German Emperor Charles. However, an alliance was formed between England, France, the Pope, Venice and Milan against the German Emperor Charles. When the Turkish ruler Suleiman the Magnificent attacked the Hungarians, if Charles led his armies into Hungarian territory against the Turks, this alliance would attack the German emperor behind him. Seeing this situation, Charles was therefore doomed to remain inactive in the face of the Turks' attack on Hungarian territory. He only sent a few thousand German forces to the Hungarians. Although the papacy sided against the Germans, it did not want to let Catholic Hungary fall into the hands of the Muslim Turks. Therefore, it sent an army to support the Hungarians. Croatia, Poland, Bohemia and Bavaria also sent troops to support the Hungarians. At that time, the Hungarian armored cavalry was the strongest force in Europe. The number of the Allied army gathered under the command of Louis II exceeded 50,000. While King Louis moved towards the Turks in the southern direction with the forces under his command, Suleiman the Magnificent was advancing towards Mohacs with his army. Finally, the two armies came face to face on the plain of Mohacs. Mohacs was located on the edge of the Danube, and right next to it was a swamp called Karasu, in the course of the right branch of the Danube. To the southwest of the city, there was a hill rising in the form of an anteater, and at the southern foot of this hill, there was a church, which the Turks called Ambush Church. Suleiman the Magnificent, who held the Najinirat hill, had a commanding position over the valley, stretching in front of him. The Ottoman army had adopted a different formation in this battle. In this new organization, 3 ranks were formed behind each other. In the front line was the Romanian army under the command of Vizier Ibrahim Pasha. In the second line was the Anatolian army under the command of Behram Pasha, the Beylerbey of Anatolia, and in the third line was the Sultan with the Janissaries. 300 Ottoman cannons were lined up in 2 ranks behind the Romanian and Anatolian soldiers. Malkoçoğlu Bali Bey and Hüsrev Bey, 2 of their Akinjis, were laying in ambush on the ambush church side, waiting for the Hungarian attack. The reason for the abandonment of the classical Ottoman formation in this battle was the Hungarian armored cavalry. These armored cavalry were linked to each other with sharp chains and would advance by mowing down all the soldiers in a wide area. In addition, their armor was often impervious to arrows and swords. They could only be killed with a mace. This could only be possible with a charge to their flanks and rear. Therefore, such a gradual order of warfare was adopted. The Hungarian army was divided into 2 ranks according to its own battle plan. The first line was formed as center, right and left under the command of Commander Tomari. The second line consisted of 4 columns under the command of King Louis. The 85 cannons of the Hungarians were placed in the center of the second line. At around 1:30 in the afternoon, the Hungarian army began to mobilize. The banners unfurled were the banners of the armored Hungarian cavalry. Thereupon, Suleiman the Magnificent had his own banners unfurled. At that time, Sultan Suleiman, whose eyes filled with tears, raised his hands to the sky and said, "O Allah, might and strength are from you, help and protection are from you, at the Ummah of Muhammad." Upon this, all the cavalry dismounted from their horses and prostrated themselves. Vizier Ibrahim Pasha took the lead of the Romanian army to fight in the front lines. Breaths were held. The Hungarian armored cavalry was coming upon the Ottoman soldiers like raging torrents. The charge of the Hungarian armored cavalry was awesome. In the first moments, the Romanian troops were badly battered against them, but Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha skillfully managed to spread his troops to the sides. The Hungarian horsemen, who had pierced the Romanian soldiers, rushed into the Anatolian soldiers. When the Anatolian troops under Behram Pasha's command were also quickly thrown to the flanks, the Hungarian army continued to ride towards the Janissaries. They were followed by the second line of cavalry under the command of King Louis. While the Hungarians were making such progress, the Akinjis under the command of Hüsrev and Balibeys started to press the Hungarians from their flanks and rear. It was at this moment that the Hungarian soldiers were confronted with 300 Ottoman cannons. Rapidly fired Ottoman cannons started to pierce the Hungarian armored soldiers. When the Hungarian cavalry, which was also pressed from the right and left sides, started to retreat, the Ottoman army became more united. The Akinjis, on the other hand, blocked the way back for the Hungarians. Thus, there was only one direction left for the trapped Hungarian soldiers to escape, and that was the Karasu swamp. Most of the Hungarians who did not know where to escape drowned in these swamps. Very few were able to escape and save their lives. As a result of this battle, which lasted only 2 hours, almost the entire Hungarian army was destroyed. Among the Hungarian soldiers bogged down in the swamp was the Hungarian King Louis II. Thus, this war became the shortest war in the history of the world, and the most unforgettable tragedy in Hungarian history. The Hungarians, whose king had died, had no forces left to defend themselves. Suleiman the Magnificent and his army moved from here and marched to Buda, the Hungarian capital. The city of Buda surrendered the keys of the city to Sultan Suleiman without any defense. Thus, the 526-year-old Hungarian kingdom came under Ottoman rule as a result of only a 2-hour battle. Suleiman the Magnificent, who celebrated Ramadan in Belgrade, celebrated Eid al-Adha in Buda. The fall of Hungary against the Ottomans in such a short period of time caused a tremendous fear in all Europe. Europeans had only one sentence on their lips: the Turks are coming.